Hi there, and welcome to the Blueskies Podcast. I'm PR Ganapati, your host. Today we've got part one of a three-part miniseries with Air Cmde KC Kuruvilla. On 6th of December 1971, a few days after the commencement of the 1971 war for the liberation of Bangladesh, in the western sector near Dera Baba Nanak, a young flying officer KC Kuruvilla flying a Sukhoi 7 made a first, a second, and then a third pass. In fact, an army officer on the ground remarked that this pilot is crazy, he's going to kill himself, to silence a machine gun that was troubling a brigade of ours that was trying to make a breakthrough and cross over to the other side of the international border. He was shot down on that third pass, ejected, and then was captured and spent a few days short of 1 year as a prisoner of war. So over the course of the next 3 episodes, we are going to tell the story of Flying Officer KC Kuruvilla. In part 1, we're going to speak about his journey to become an Air Force fighter pilot. He stood first in his pilot's course and then was fully ops on Sukhoi 7 at the time of the war. So we'll describe the story leading up to his capture. In part 2, we'll speak about his incarceration, how he helped some of his fellow POWs escape from their POW camp, and the consequences of that escape being discovered. And in part 3, we'll speak about his repatriation to India and his experiences when he returned. Stay tuned for every one of these episodes. I can promise you it's going to be really exciting. On to the show.
But it was still firing back at this brigade. Mm-hmm. So we did another attack. So basically it was my third, circuit over that area. Mm-hmm. So in that second attack, I silenced that HMG.
KC-2, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, left left, split west, copy.
Hello and welcome to the Blueskies Podcast.
Just 70, Roger, report IP southeast, connection for midway, and field selected.
It is my great pleasure today to speak to Air Cmde KC Kuruvilla. Air Cmde Kuruvilla was commissioned into the fighter stream of the Indian Air Force through NDA in 1967, and he retired in 2001 after fighting many fighter aircraft and seeing action during the 1971 war in the western sector, where he was flying Sukhoi 7s. In his action, he inflicted heavy damage on many enemy positions. He was shot down by anti-aircraft artillery and was taken POW. And was subsequently repatriated after the war. He was awarded a VRC, a Veer Chakra, for his actions during the war. Subsequently, as a squad leader, Air Cmde Kuruvilla was featured in a movie because of a bird hit that he suffered in another ejection, and we'll talk to him about that. He also commanded 9 Squadron and later the prestigious Air Force Station Jodhpur 32 Wing, particularly during the tensions around Kargil. And so we're going to have a really fascinating conversation with Air Cmde Kuruvilla today. He also, his story will hopefully be featured in a movie sometime. So this is kind of a teaser into it. But first things first, sir, welcome to the program. And thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you, Gans. Thank you for having me on your program. And I'm delighted to be here.
So, you know how this starts. Just love to hear your background growing up and, what inspired you to join the Air Force? Did you have a family connection? What was that journey like and your initial training leading up to the 71
Sure.
Ops?
So that's a very interesting question. As I've said it before, quite jokingly, but it's a lot of serious content in it. I was put into a boarding at 5 and I came out at 56. So it's been a journey all along. It would be interesting to know that the year was 1950 and it definitely impinged on our school.
Mm-hmm.
That was where my life was, and on my father, because he was a chartered accountant with the Imperial Bank of India, which is now the State Bank of India.
Aha, right.
Consequently, he was shunted everywhere. So yes, I was put into La Martiniere in Calcutta at the age of 5 and just forgotten about. To answer your question, at that age, and because of my father's movement, I was often not sent home by the school. And I would be handed over to a ground staff of the Indian Airlines at school. And then that lady would put me into a cockpit in a Dakota, which would either fly me to Dibrugarh or to my father's friend's home. And consequently, I would be riding in a Dakota, and the captain, I remember, was Captain Abraham. He would completely forget about me, and I used to be loitering around in the hangar and looking at aircraft, and I would be there till 6 in the evening. So a flight that came in at, say, 8 or 10 in the morning, and I would be in the hangar. So this went on for quite a bit of my life.
Right.
And so I will then cut that part short. And I finished school from Montfort because my father was sent to the Andaman Islands. And it is from there that I went home to Dhanbad, where my father was. Imperial Bank was a great bank. It was huge properties. And there I was summoned one day. My father, of course, had all the privileges of Imperial Bank. And it was a huge lawn, something like, say, about 200 feet long in length and about 70 feet in width in front of the bank. And this was abutting the main road. So on Sundays, he would have his gin and tonic, and there he would be sitting on a chair all by himself with a side table. This time there was another chair in front of him. And he had his both feet fully stretched, staring into the yonder, and the guard came, "Saab, aapko saab bula raha hai." So I went running down, and there was a chair in front of him. He says, "Hello, Bennett." That's what my name was at home. And he says, "Hello, Bennett, sit down." And then I sat myself down, and then he looked straight at me and he says, "Would you like a glass of beer?" So I was shocked. So I was not about to let up on my father. So I said, "Yes, sir." So he looked at to the right. He says, "Boy," the Kansama was there. So he said, "Boy, bada baba ke liye beer le aao." So the beer came, and my father said, "Cheers." I picked up my glass, and I didn't know what was the way to drink. So in 2-3 sips, I put the glass down, and he didn't seem to look at the glass or me or anything. And then came this very pointed arrow shot at me. He said, "So how have you done in school?" At 16, I was pretty good at academics. Okay. I told him, I said, "Sir, I'm sure I'll get a distinction." Oh, he said, "Is that so? Very nice." And then he looks at me, he says, "Have you thought of what you might do after this?" So that came as a shock because I wasn't expecting that as a question. But I had to answer it immediately. There was no waiting. And I was started to get a buzz already after the first glass of beer. So I think I have an interest in flying, aviation. Oh, he said, "Is that so? That's good to hear." And by then I quickly, before he said anything else, I put down that glass of beer and put it down.
Yeah.
Then he looks at me and he says, "Do you know there are several types of aviation in this country?" Oh my God, that bowled me. I didn't know what was coming. Yeah. And then looked up at me, and then he asked me this question, Guns, you got to listen to this carefully. And he looks at me and he says, "Do you think you can have another glass?" By then I had a nice buzz and I'm not ready to back out. So I looked him straight in the eye. I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Boy, boy, Bada Baba ke liye beer le aao. And off he went. And he brought my third glass of beer, placed it right in front of me. I picked it up and I about to sip it. And my dad said, hold on, son. So I'm frozen there, with my glass right next to my lips. And then he said to me, really seriously, he said, son, you must remember to recognize your last glass. My God, I put that glass down. There was such a profound statement. When he said this to me, remember to recognize your last glass, it was a message. He was just telling me that you must know your limits.
Yeah.
And from that day till I retired, every fighter aircraft that I tried to bend, I used to fly it or maneuver it in what we guys term as the flight envelope,
Right.
in the region where you're just short of breaking that aircraft up.
Right.
So it's very interesting because in air combat, if you're not or if you're just maneuvering on the fringes, but not within that envelope where the aircraft can actually get disfigured, or you can have some fatigue of the wing or of the skin, anything.
Right.
It can just go out of your hand and get into a spin. Anything can happen. But I remembered my father in each of those instances where I never, ever put myself into a situation where I did not know my limits.
Right.
Anyway, so this was December 1961. I said, and I didn't know what was coming. Then he said, do you know that there is military aviation in India and we have just gotten off the ground? And I understood what he meant. 50, I joined school and we are now 11 years down the road. So things were building up in India and he never, I don't think he knew about NDA, but he just pointed me in the direction of military aviation. So that answers your question about how I generated interest in flying.
Right.
I found out that there was something called the NDA exam. I went for the NDA exam. I cleared it very comfortably. And next thing I knew, I was called to Allahabad. When we got our results, I found myself selected for NDA. Oh, I was really happy.
Right.
I wasn't very high up on the merit at all, but I was sufficiently high to be well within the cutoff limit. It was when I joined the Air Force that I really became serious once again about studies. In NDA, it was survival for me because from the first term onwards, I had a very, very tough time.
Oh,
Firstly,
I would have thought, as a boarding school kid, you would have been
not
very
that
at
aspect.
home.
Not that aspect. Let me just explain to you. Just about a month ago, I met a army corpsmate who joined as director. His name is Chandra. And somehow he said, I remember you being known for boxing. I said, yeah, my God. And I said, I nearly died in the ring. So he said, without knowing, and he's not even NDA, he said, did you fight the Nigerian chap called Lekot Zamani? I said, yes. I said, how do you know? He said he was banned from boxing in the IMA because he nearly killed everybody. I said, that's what he did to me. I said, in the second round, I was flat on the floor and there was a shadow on my face. It was my nose. It was facing fully 90 degrees right.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and Commodore Lewin was the referee. I heard count of 7 and I jumped up and I was bleeding. And I took off my gloves. The bell rang, luckily. So I took off my gloves. I shoved my 2 little fingers and straightened my nasal septum. And I fought the third round.
Oh, wow.
And the punches I got to my stomach 4 months later, it became an abscess. So then we went to Air Force training. Meanwhile, 65 war broke out and we lost 1 year of commission. But right from Allahabad, where we flew the HT2, of course, we went before that to Nagpur and flew the L5. And
Oh, you did? Okay, wow.
Yeah.
One of the few people I've heard of who flew the L5.
Yeah. I must tell you that. So after NDA, they immediately called us to Nagpur and I was in EFTU.
EFTU,
flying. Elementary
and it
flying.
was were these VT registered aircraft or were they service registered?
No, VT.
VT.
VT, and the 2 instructors were Haka and Raja. Hazarika and Rajagopal, wonderful instructors.
Civilians or they were?
No, flight lieutenants.
Flight lieutenants, okay.
And who was it? Wing Commander Michael, wonderful CEO. There I became a sergeant cadet,
Okay.
Yeah, that was very interesting for me. And I think De Monte was sergeant cadet, but I was also made some appointment or something like that and given in charge of the mess because the 65 war had broken out.
Right.
And both the AN-12 squadrons moved to Nagpur. So we were doing full-fledged armed duties.
Wow.
Because the airmen couldn't be trusted. That was one of our first wars in the recent years, if so to speak, after, say, 47.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So everybody was jittery, and we cadets were trained on the 303, and we were trusted rather than the airmen, because the airmen were firing off, at the slightest sound.
Yeah.
So I still remember those guard duties and all that. And I got my solo in I think 6 hours or some. Our total flying was, I think, 10 or 11 hours. And from there, we went to Allahabad. Allahabad, again, was a difficult period for me because I had constantly changing instructors. And I got terribly underconfident because I got the feeling that I was not wanted. Though I had this feeling of several instructors taking me on, I got my solo on time. I did well at that place, but not so much in aviation as in ground subjects. I came first in ground subjects, and I know I can never forget that occasion. When my name was announced for the trophy, I was missing from parade. I immediately thought, oh hell, they'll give away this trophy to somebody else. And when charging to CGI, the way he spoke to me, I felt quite nervous.
Right.
And anyway, then the parade started, and when we did the passing out parade, I went and got my medal for standing first in academics. In Jodhpur, again, it was sail through. I didn't, I did average plus or above average, whatever you want to call it. But in FTW, I swiped the Sword of Honor, best in academics all round, and best all-round fighter pilot.
And you flew Vampires, I presume?
That's right.
Okay.
We flew Vampires. It was from there that I got shunted directly to 7th Squadron via 2-1. We sailed through very quickly. We didn't even spend the assigned 6 months. I think I finished in 3 or 4 months, and I ran to 7.
Right.
And and I joined 7.
And what aircraft was 2-1 flying? And
flying Vampires guns, same aircraft, but they were all, we were doing gunnery. They were all live. That's right. So first time you're doing live gunnery and low-level nav. Oh, I really enjoyed doing low-level nav on a VAMP. And then for the first time in your life, you're doing low-level on your own.
Right.
There was no such a thing as a chase pilot and all that.
Yeah.
You did a solo, and then you were sent in absolute trust. You were just told, they say, boy, that's the aircraft, doodle off. And they would check your nav, that you're doing your nav route correctly. Brief us on gunnery and all that. And then, of course, I started life in a first operational squadron. What a shock 7th Squadron was.
And that was in
Air Marshal
Hendon.
Later Air Marshal Mansingh had just handed over command, and he had taken over command from late Air Chief Marshal Katre, who was then a wing commander. Right, so it was Wing Commander Katre, followed by Mansingh, followed by Harry Chitwal, who was our CEO when I reported. All illustrious commanders, all illustrious. And the flight commanders also, Dice Limman, ambidextrous. Yeah, he would write to the left hand, and then sine squared theta plus cos squared theta is equal to 1. And he'd write 1 with his right hand and then underline it from right to left. Oh my God, he was somebody very difficult. You liked his style, and he was a good aviator, and he was all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And we would always try to imitate him in everything, And he was very good in mathematics. And I loved mathematics and physics. So started
7th
life
Squadron
in
was
7th
flying the
Squadron.
Hunter at that time, sir?
That's right.
Okay. What did you, how did you feel flying the Hunter coming up from the Vampire after that?
It's a nice, I felt fantastic. We did, it's when you drive a car that's manual and then you get onto a hydraulically powered steering,
Right.
you tend to oversteer, right? Or understeer. Because when you oversteer, you understeer. The
Right.
same thing in the Hunter. Where as soon as you got in and when you wheels were up and that stick was moved, then you could hear the hydraulic hiss,
Right.
and the aircraft was rocking left to right. But you got, immediately after a little while settle down.
Yeah.
But really, it's the gentleman's aircraft. The Hunter always reminded me of a guy in a hat and pinstripe suit and with perfect English, uttering all the right sounds. And we had wonderful instructors who put us through the paces. Dice Dimon, Pete Gaynor. These were amazing people and very nice young pilots like Gunnar, Nippy Aurora, Julius, Fats Nair, David Figueredo. These were all a whole bunch of senior flying officers.
Right.
And we were all pilot officers and they were chase and navigation and my God, we would be dead scared of them. There was no buddy. It was proper sir there. At work was work, play was play. And the twain never met nor ever got mixed up.
I've heard some people say that, because of the bulge, you all were not getting a lot of flying and, because there were so many people in the squadron. Did you experience any of that?
What you say is absolutely true. I had some very good friends like Harish Masan, Bingo Gokhale and all. These guys suffered so much. I was so lucky to be in 7th Squadron. We never had a break.
Wow.
There was no bulge, there was nothing. There were 25 pilots in the squadron, but everybody was programmed very well. The leaves were allocated so well and everything was made. And the serviceability, my God, we had a chiefy called Balbir Singh. My God, we were more scared of him than any of us flying officers. Because he would allocate the aircraft, and he would produce 6 aircraft every day. He was a Sardar. Harry Chatwal was Sardar. He was not broke any nonsense. And Wing Commander Chatwal was such a daring chap. He broke his hand and he's flying in the cockpit. He would no doctor dare ask him, why are you flying with a broken hand? He used to fly with his left hand.
Wow.
The doctor approached him. He said, I don't want to see you. Get out of here. Oh my God, I tell you, not very good example for youngsters, but the daring and the confidence in my father's words, know your limits.
Yeah.
Obviously, you will respect a guy who's taking you for a dual check, flying with his left hand. Right? Yeah.
Just need 7B, like your report that southeast connection for midway,
And so did you complete your operational syllabus on the Hunter or did you do that on the
Yeah, I did. I had the fortune of not only getting my, fully ops with 7th Squadron, but I also did a ferry and we got a change of base.
Okay.
So from Hindon, we moved to Bagdogra, which was another, there was a very interesting incident in 7 in Bagdogra. We had a flight commander called, they used to call him Harry Ford. I think he was Gerald Ford, right? Senior flight commander. He came to us somewhere about 6 months after we reached Bagdogra. All right. And he took me up for an IF sortie. He was completely new to that area. And Bagdogra, you have to understand, as soon as you get airborne and you turn left, you are heading towards Ashimara. And almost immediately you're in their local flying area. Right? So, in other words, you're heading east.
Right.
Right? So, it was a day when we took off. I remember we turned right. So, the other runway was in use. I forget which it was, I think 0936, if I north-south runway. Anyway, so we turned right and immediately we were in cloud.
Okay.
Forget about cloud. Fordy, as they used to call it, I'll just say Ford.
Yeah,
right?
no, Hugh Lancelot Ford was his name.
Yeah,
His nickname was
correct.
Henry
Ford.
Ford.
Okay, yeah, correct. So Ford said, okay, Kuru, get down under the hood. So I got under the hood. Now, we continued a climb. At 25,000 feet, old Kailasam's voice came up on RT. He said, call sign so-and-so. You're right over Hashima at 25. We have traffic over this place.
Oh, boy.
So kindly steer so-and-so. We turned right, steered that, and then...
You're over Bangladesh at that point. Or
No,
Pakistan
no. Correct. We're very close. Forget about that. You're absolutely right. My God, you hit the nail on the head. To avoid getting into Bangladesh, we steered a little more than now 270 to head back to our side. Right? And my God, we entered the sonic dive. And that's the time Kai picked us up again. And he yelled at Ford and he said, you're heading straight into Kanchenjunga. And then we broke cloud. And he immediately tapped my control. We did a sort of hard left, again got back into cloud. And then we oversteered, less than 090 so that we get a mean 270 course. Right? So we were steering some 230 for a while, then got on to 240 and heading now, we got onto the RT, but the RT with Bagdogra was fading. And eventually we couldn't hear them at all. So we broke cloud at 500 feet. And when he broke cloud, I saw, Fordy sir fiddling around with a switch, which we call the green salad, right? That tells you roughly where you are, left or right of base or what. That also was not working.
Okay.
So after that, he said, Kuru, come out of the hood. And I came out, we were at low level. And he said, Kuru, I don't recognize this area at all.
Wow.
Do you know where you are? So I came as a shock to me. Here's my instructor telling me he doesn't know where he is. But I said, what a man to say.
To admit, yeah.
To admit that he doesn't know where he is. My antenna immediately came up. I looked around and I said, sir, we have done a lot of low flying. We are definitely not in our local flying area. We are beyond our airfield. So then he said, okay, let's look around, see if you can spot any area that you know. I looked around, I said, sir, everything is unfamiliar. Then we looked at the fuel. It was 500 pounds a side. And that means we just can't make it anywhere except a direct bearing to base or a homing. And then we go straight in and land.
Right.
But that didn't happen. So now we are steering towards west again, rather east again. And after a little while, we saw a little clearing. And Harry Ford took over the control. He says, Kuru, I want you to help me. We are not going to make it anywhere. We don't know where we are. I'm going to force land this aircraft.
Wow.
Okay. So we found this thing, this kind of a linear track. And we did a low run full of vultures and cows.
Jeez.
And it appeared to be an old abandoned airfield.
Airfield, okay.
Yeah. So he did a tight circuit, came and roared past with full throttle. You open the throttle right over the runway. It created such a sound, perhaps for the animals on the ground.
Wow.
They all ran helter-skelter. And he took over the control. He said, just follow me on the control. And we did this circuit. And as we're coming over, it's all paddy fields. And then there's a strip. Okay. So short of the paddy field, he switched off the engine. And I think, if my memory serves me right, I don't know whether we had what he did, or whether we had a shoot or something. I don't know why that's coming to my head. But anyway, he switched off the engine. We touched down right at the very beginning. It was full of gravel. The aircraft ran. He put the nose down, full brakes. We reached the other end, and the hunter trainer's nose was in the paddy.
Oh boy.
And the front wheel was right at the very edge. Then we jumped out of the cockpit. All the villagers came. And guess what? That was the KC project runway, where the DAX had landed in the Indo-Nepal KC project. It was some river project where they were, what should I say, barricading or damming the water for the farmers in that area.
Fascinating.
So it was called the Indo-Nepal KC project.
So they'd create a little makeshift gravel strip, is it?
Yeah, they had a gravel strip, and God knows the KC project was in the 50s, if I remember right, or somewhere around that time. Wow. So luckily we found that, and we forced landed, and we were down to some 200 pounds aside. Just enough fuel for, I don't know, anything, for nothing.
Right.
So anyway, but what is the interesting thing? Of course, the base was quite, shaken up.
Because you would have been overdue at that point.
Correct. We were overdue. They declared us missing. And then the SU said, no, this aircraft has flown past you. Kai did some calculations. Kailasam was an amazing controller. He says, according to me, they did a Mac dive. That was the RT conversation I got. Then they steered left, came out of the Mac dive. Then they must have done the rest of the procedure in broken cloud, which is very low ceiling. And they would have definitely overflown the airfield. And he was right. We were 80 nautical miles past Bagdogra.
Wow.
And the KC strip was some 40 nautical miles or something still to go.
Boy.
And, here is really guts and glory. Wing Commander Chatwala, CO, he just took off in a chopper, landed there. He surveyed the situation, and in his typical style, he says, have this bloody aircraft turn around, get the civilians to turn it around.
Oh,
he turned it around, and some barrels of fuel came 5 hours later.
Wow.
And the local DC took us to his office and gave us a little room to rest, because both of us were shaken up after this episode. And then we were, hounded by civilians and offering us this, pulling our overall, wanting to know this question, map and that perspex and all. They were pulling at that. They wanted the map, and it was very sort of unruly. So for our safety and all, he had the cops beat back everybody and put us in a room where we rested. And meanwhile, some drums of fuel came, and he just filled in to cover the bingo warning light. Right? What he did is he filled in another 300 pounds. They brought filters and all that. The fuel had to be filtered before it went into the tank. So they got all that, and there was a hand churning pump. It's typical field. I think the army lent assistance and all that. And that's all I remember. And you won't believe it. After our rest, we came back to the airfield. We got a whole pile of civilians with these, flat end, heavy wrought iron things, which they beat the ground to flatten it. When they create roads. So a whole lot of them were brought from somewhere, and they hammered the gravel in. That's it.
Boy.
Okay. And now we turned the Hunter around, and we had the tail, entire tail facing out in the
sitting
paddy.
Out over the paddy.
And only the main wheels were at the beginning, and the chocks were placed at the back and front.
Wow.
And then he started the engines, and the front chocks were removed. The rear chocks remained in place. I still remember he lowered 2 notches of flaps, opened full throttle, and I tell you, he got airborne at the very end, yanking back. And he himself, that's a commanding officer.
Yeah.
Amazing. He took off that aircraft from there. No, anybody from command and all who spoke up there, those are the kind of commanders we had,
Right.
Anybody who from command who didn't know his onions and trying to tell the field what to do, he used to put them in their place. I think the only people our COs then spoke to were the SASO or the CMC.
Right.
Nobody else. They would bloody put them all in their place.
Fascinating. After
And
that, you converted to the SU.
Yeah, so the helicopter brought us back. And I think I left, my term had already come to an end and I was to leave. Within a week, I bid farewell to the squadron and had, the Wing Commander Chatwal and everybody else. I think I went, and when I came back for my farewell, Wing Commander Bunny Koila was in command. Yeah, that's right. So that's what I seem to remember.
Right.
And I became, to answer your question, I was fully ops. I had done my conversion to SUS in between, in Bareilly.
In Bareilly,
yeah, that's right. Under Sridharan and Wing Commander Sen. Coordinator Sridharan was the flight commander. Wing Commander Sen. Give her the gun. Give her the gun. He was the one who gave me my solo. Whenever he wanted
which son is this? This is Laddu Sen?
No. This is not Laddu Sen. And not Gabu. I don't remember what his name was.
Coco Sen?
Coco Sen. That's right. Sorry.
Okay, right.
That's right. That is the Coco Sen. Because he used to say, give her the gun, give her the gun. That means reheat. You have to put on reheat. Give her the gun is what he meant.
Okay.
Which, this is the first time you're used to the kind of headset.
Right.
After the British headset, wearing that thing. And, it's so difficult to get your bone dome on. Because it had kind of straps which could be taken out both ends. So we used to hammer one end and close it up so that you don't, you have to operate only one side.
Right.
Oh my God, all sorts of things we learned.
Tell me about the SUS. What was the aircraft like? What was it designed for? What sort of missions did you train
the
for?
SU came to us as a ground attack machine, right? It had a sweep of 60 degrees at 25% chord, right? So the wing was stuck to it, in the most oddest shape of any aeroplane or any aeroplane could have. But it had the thickness of wing that was almost like a Dakota wing. So it produced tremendous lift. And you had boundary layer fences, 2 sets. So you could really maneuver that aircraft at low level.
At low level.
Yeah. And I forget what the engine Russian name was, but it delivered something like 21,000 or 23,000 pounds of thrust.
Oh, wow.
Which was one of the most powerful engines of that era.
Right.
Yeah. Because this aircraft, ideally when we were being taught to fly, you would be coming in, in the conversion stage, you would be coming in at a threshold speed of 420 kilometers per hour.
Oh my goodness.
And you're rounding off at 380 and touching down at 360.
Wow.
Nothing else was allowed.
Wow. That's even faster than the MiG-21, I think.
Oh, much faster than any of the others.
Wow.
Yeah. In the MiG, I think it's around 290 or something. But this was it. So really good pilots I've seen touchdown at 320 and all that. But aircraft just falls out of your hand. So if you're not close to the ground and you're not doing you're doing something without knowing what you're doing, aircraft will just fall out. So initially especially in night flying and all that, dark night flying, they were all called arrivals. We just arrived. Yeah. You just came thud into the ground. And especially dark night preparation for the war, no lights. You only flicker your landing light and you're landing at that speed.
Right.
Many guys have gone off the runway, broken landing lights, and the runway landings. What do you call the demarcation lights?
Right.
Yeah, it was. So to answer your question, it's a wonderful aircraft to fly. I must tell you an incident. Much later, I went to Tag Day, and from Tag Day, a guy called Deepak Sani came to our squadron. it was a squadron visit, right?
Mm-hmm.
With a view to do inter-type air combat.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, that day was still formulating the, what they call dissimilar aircraft combat, right? Yeah. But Deepak Sahni was sent. And I remember I was flight commander or I was a senior squad leader, I think that's right. And I was put up to do air combat with him on the Sukhoi. To this day, I have it in my blue book. That round circle on the Sukhoi neatly eclipsed this MiG-21, 800 meters in front of me with the Pippa on the cockpit.
Wow.
That photograph, this Pushy Singh borrowed it, that and one or two other, the strike on the railway train in the war, and he never returned it, ever.
Oh my.
Yeah, I mean, terrible I felt.
I'll
Anyway, but Deepak Sahni came back. And mind you, he came as a staff of TAG Day. I have never met a more down-to-earth pilot who written in my blue book, he said that was an excellent combat. And mind you, I'll tell you one thing. He made us fly straight and level for 1 minute before we started the combat.
Right.
Giving you a fair understanding that both of us are at the same speed. And we have not engaged or cheated or engaged our reheat beforehand and then called on the combat or anything like that,
Right.
These are things which I never knew. And, and I asked him why. I said, we are going out of the local flying area. He said, don't worry about that. We'll start the combat now. And, I learned so much in that one sortie from him, even though I got behind him. And he wrote in my blue book, he said, that was excellent combat, good use of maneuvering in the horizontal plane, even though I tried to get you into the vertical plane. So to answer your maneuver beautifully, so long as you didn't put that nose up and try to get it to somebody else's drawn into combat, somebody drawing you into combat in the vertical plane. If you didn't make that mistake, you could get behind anybody. Right. We did Nat versus Sukhois in Halwara many times. We would keep them at 100 feet and they would be terrified to come down to that height. Yeah, that's it. And it would turn at solid G. I remember one Dasi visit with Wing Commander Bali leading and me in number 2. And we did this 9G turn. His entire upper surface had wrinkled, almost buckled. Nearly, the skin almost came off.
Wow. And
when we landed and the Dasi guy came and saw the aircraft, he said, what G did you turn? And the G meter showed that peak thing as 9G. So these are things that you could do on the Sukhoi. But remember what I said, I knew my limits. We would not push it.
So coming back to, the Su, and after 2-1, I think you were posted to 2-2. And where was that based? And that was, I guess, in the...
No, from 7. From 7, I went to 222.
222, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And from 7 to 222.
Okay. And where was that based and what was
222 was based in Ambala. And from Ambala, we did a lot of flying and moved to Halwara for the war, knowing that the war is coming up.
Okay. So give us a sense for what the mood was like leading up to the war. And then, of course, if we can now start getting into the, the missions that you flew.
Yeah, sure. So we did a lot of flying in 222. I was the baby of the squadron and the junior most flying officer. And I was treated with great love and care. And a lot of that came from being able to fly well and meet the squadron standards, especially in air combat and gunnery. Okay, because coming from a hunter background and air combat, there were a lot of people who were basically from mid-tier background, where they didn't do much of air combat as such, or from the Tufani background. So some of us who came, or let me speak for myself, coming from the hunter background, we had definitely an edge on flying the Sukhoi in an air combat with anybody. Yeah, so that helped a lot. And gunnery, under people like Pete Gaynor and Dhiman on the Hunter, where you're calculating everything, to what should I say, to the T.
Mm.
Yeah. It helped us a lot on Sukhois.
Uh-huh.
So preparation for the war was hectic. We flew a lot. There was no rest. We were mostly in the squadron, in the ORP. And sure enough, when the balloon went up on 3rd December, 4th morning, I was in the cockpit. And yeah, we did a strike on Chandler. And then the next day, we did a strike on Chistian Mandi, where we hit the tank train.
Right.
And then followed by a thing. And the tank train was a very amazing sortie.
Yeah, each of these sorties, if you can just tell us the detail and just put us in the cockpit with you.
Yeah, sure.
What you saw.
So Chandler Airfield was a typical airfield strike. So Alan DeCosta leading, myself number 2, I think Bipin Raje or Gole were number 3, and I don't remember who the number 4 was. It perhaps was Apte, Susie Apte.
Susie
right?
Apte, okay.
Yeah. We took off and we did a low-level navigation, pulled up bang on time.
What were you carrying in terms of armament?
We were carrying rockets and guns.
Okay.
That was the heaviest thing we had. Later, we also got the 80mm pods. But till we got that, we were firing the 57mm rockets. But we were carrying 4. There were 6 station aircraft, so 4 pods and 2 fuel tanks. Yeah, so we pulled up, we saw the airfield, discharged our weapons. Whatever the film could capture, it captured. It was declared a successful strike. We knew on the airfield, basically, we didn't see any aircraft, but we hit whatever installations we could see.
Okay.
Yeah. So in my case, I remember hitting something that looked like a hangar or some building which was on the left side of the runway.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So we only did 1 attack. We didn't do a second. And we then
Did you encounter any ACAC?
No, we didn't encounter any ACAC, and everything was really ultra low level. Very stable platform at ultra low level.
Right.
Yeah. So basically our operating heights were 100 to 130, 140, 150 feet.
Wow.
Not more than that. Yeah.
My God.
Yeah, not more than that. So, and terrain riding, if you saw something, you just pop up and get back down. You'll ride the plane. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
what time was this strike?
So it was somewhere around 6:15, 6:30 that we took off. Yeah. And by 7:10, 7:15 or so, we finished the strike and we were back.
Okay, great.
And this was all the way low.
What was it like the first time you were crossing into enemy territory?
It's a nice question. I would say that we all have fear, but we also learn to overcome fear. So when I first got into the cockpit, as I had always discussed with Grace or my friends, I didn't want to come back maimed or, without a leg or that kind of stuff, I wanted to be totally intact. So I was very sure that if I were hit or anything like that, I'm going to take somebody with me. And, whether it's on land or on the ground. I mean, in the air or on the ground. Right? So that was my attitude. And in the first sortie, I remember getting into it. There was a little bit of nervousness, but the moment the aircraft started up and we started taxiing out and you did a formation takeoff fully armed, all your concentration is there. And then once you spread out into the, into the navigation phase and into your formations for covering each other's tail and doing standby, everybody did navigation. It's not that only the leader did.
Right.
The leader was very clear that you did. Suppose he dropped out, the number 3 would take over the lead, but as a number 2, I would have to go into number 3 position and be doing the navigation to support him. So everything was all pre-briefed. So we had I should add on to your question. We had a very high standard of briefings, exercises, sorties done, film assessments, debriefs. All this, I'm sorry, I took it for granted that but these daily routine things were of a very, very high standard.
Right.
Extremely high standard. And there was no fooling around with Wing Commander DaCosta. After work, he was a different guy, but at work, he was definitely a very tough guy. You know, so, and that was the thing with all, we had very nice pilots also, Gangs, Bomani Rani, Honda, you know. So all these were excellent flyers, you know, so we were very lucky. I was very fortunate to have such flight lieutenants, senior flight lieutenants to fly with, and I was a junior most. Yeah.
report that Southeast connection for
And so second day you hit the tank train, you said. So
yeah, that's right. The next sortie was the tank train. And now this was a really tricky sortie. I don't know how my CO accepted this. This was takeoff from Ambala, climb to 6 kilometers, and cruise all the way to Bhavalpur in Rajasthan. And before Bhavalpur, descend to low level, 60 kilometers away from Bhavalpur, turn right and another 60 kilometers into Pakistan, and you pull up for this attack on this place called Chistian Mandi. My God, what a surprise. As we pulled up there was this train, long train standing on the platform.
Wow.
Full of tanks.
And so we had some intelligence that told us about
obviously,
it. Right?
Yes, obviously. I was too young and to know anything about it. And in the briefing, all these intelligent aspects were very nicely covered, in the sense we were told that there'll be likely to be a train with tanks or armor around that place. Everything was need to know. We were not saturated with unwanted intelligence and all that. And I think Wing Commander DaCosta's way of, dealing with the young people and members of the formation was very nice. If you were a deputy formation leader, you were told certain things. If you were a wingman, you were told certain things, and you were told definitely to make sure you had a rubber neck and eyes behind the back of your head. No bones about it. So we were constantly looking for enemy flying aircraft, navigating, So there was no time for any fear. Guns. And when you pull up, boy, your entire concentration, you throw away everything else, your hand is on the throttle, and your eyes are fixed on the sight, and you're maneuvering the aircraft to get that pipper on your target and give it the blast. And that's exactly what it did. We pulled up. Right in front of us was this huge railway station with this long platform and this train standing there. We just rolled in. And in my
Again, what time of day was it?
This would have been, this I think was what should I say? It was like a mid-morning flight.
Mid-morning, okay.
Yeah, I think it was around 9 or 10 o'clock, around that time.
Did the train have anti-aircraft guns mounted on it?
No, nothing.
Okay.
There were, but to answer your question, there were anti-aircraft guns there. We saw them come. We felt a couple of bumps here and there, right? But to answer your question truthfully, I know we saw flashes. We saw puffs, but I can't say I saw anything close to me or anything like that. Nothing. We just rolled into the dive. I had this engine right in my sights. And I, with a little maneuvering, I got it into my sight. And we had learnt the art of opening fire just out of range, because you've got now 64 rockets. To finish that, it takes about 2.5 seconds.
Right.
You understand? From opening range to closing range, you got to get rid of those rockets and make sure it's safely, and make sure they're all on the target.
Right.
And that's exactly what we learned and we were taught. So we would open a little out of range and keep the pipper slightly up and allow the pipper to be depressed to the side. The pipper to be depressed onto the target somewhere near the closing range and pull-out height. So from the very first rocket, I could see it hitting the target,
Wow.
And that film showed it all. Because you can see I don't know, at the time of day, we could see the smoke from the rocket going straight towards us. Thing. What a thrill it was. So there was, really, it was a thrill. Because as soon as I finished and I was about to pull out, much before the pull out, I saw this huge ball of fire, which was on the film. It was released to in the Illustrated Weekly, and it went to Air Headquarters and all that, I remember. So that was a great thrill and a lovely sortie. And for that day, our second mission, I don't know, for some reason it got cancelled.
And you climbed back to altitude to get back to
so let me finish that. So we turned hard right, gathered our formation, crossed the international border, hit Bawalpur close by. We didn't overfly. I think we were somewhere in the proximity. And then pulled up to 6 kilometers, yelled for homing. And why are we doing this? And what's the aim of telling you this? When we reached overhead, and we descended and we came over the airfield, we had fuel only for one circuit.
Wow.
That was high we did, and in the full view of the Pakistan radar. And once, only when you become a little more senior, you realize that you would have been painting on the radar throughout that mission. And they would have sent people. We didn't see anybody. So I suppose that goes to the planning of that mission, because it could have been a high-low heading into some Rajasthan base of ours.
Correct.
But we hit the deck well before Bawalpur, hit it bang on navigation, turned right, pulled up bang on time, and there it was. And hard right out of that area, there was ACAC. It fired at us. Luckily, nobody got hit. We came back, again, climbed up high as we could. Set 82%, I still remember that. Some
optimal
endurance speed, RPM. And then we all came back and we recovered. Luckily, there was no problem on the base. One by one, all of us were recovered. We did short circuits and landed. Yeah, that was it.
So that was sixth.
No, that was fourth. Fifth. Right? And then I did one more sortie, but the main sortie of interest to you was on the 6th.
Right.
And that was the early morning sortie, which we took off to hit the Dera Baba Nanak Bridge. That was the briefing.
Right.
Take off at 6:15. We were on target, on time. We hit that bridge and we definitely damaged the bridge. Later, I don't know whether it was part of our mission or something. That bridge was brought down. And the importance of that bridge was that the Pakis had crossed over to our side in their preemptive.
Right.
On the initiative for offensive action has always been with Pakistan. We are not the ones attacking them. So in that area, they had crossed over. And the threat was to to J&K, the road connecting. Right? So that area. So I was too young to understand the strategy of that area, but I know definitely that Pak army was caught on the side of the bridge. We had to knock off that bridge. That was done. And now returning, eventually, Ganad, it was one of the brigades. It is on my email. I could definitely read it out to you sometime. There was this brigade major who was watching my attack. Colonel Chand, who was then a major. He traced me about a month ago, after 49 years, and he only to tell me what he wanted on that email. Because he said, asked the FAC, who is this pilot? So the FAC said, it's Kuruvilla. ये Kuruvilla कौन है यार? ये तो दिलेर पायलट है. ये तो आज मरने वाला. 2 अटैक कर लिया है और वो HMG को मार के गिरा दिया है 3rd अटैक में. बस उसके साथ वो भी गायब हो गया. So that I'll explain that later. So that was the mission.
Right.
We hit
and again from Ambala, is it?
From Ambala. No, from Halwara. We are now in Halwara.
You're in Halwara. Okay.
Yeah, we are in Halwara. So finish that. Now we are about a minute or so inside Indian territory when we heard an FAC saying, Blackjack 1, we have very unusual movement the whole of yesterday from the afternoon in this particular area. If you have fuel, request you to investigate. Request you to overfly and report back. So he immediately, I heard that, so he immediately said, follow me, Kuru. So I tucked in and we overflew and just flew into park border. Just crossed the park border where we saw vast amounts of vehicles and everything camouflaged at a standstill. In effect, much later I came to know on my return or sometime later, that was the Pakistani strategic reserves, which were moving up from Rajasthan region, the same Bawalpur area. So it all links up.
The train and...
Yeah, so it all links up, and whole lot of this armor and all, whatever their strike corps or whatever their strategic reserve corps was called, was actually caught napping, meaning they were caught at the break of dawn, having stopped the previous night and dug in, because now they are entering a really active air activity area, you know. So then, as soon as De Costa saw all that, he said, Kuru, I can see guns. And he was right. There were guns, but little did we realize that there was a whole battery of them, and they were all dug in and they were firing vertically upwards. That's all. Nothing was trained at us. And in my attack, I had picked up this heavy machine gun. I never knew there was an HMG. I knew of LMG and MMG. But this HMG, FAC kept on saying that this, and that is what the Colonel Chand brought out later. We did one pass. That was a fact-finding low pass.
Right.
Then we picked up our respective targets, and I attacked this HMG. I hit it with my front guns. But it was still firing back at this brigade. So we did another attack. So basically it was my third, circuit over that area. So in that second attack, I silenced that HMG completely, as quoted by Colonel Chand. Now Colonel Chand is 85 years old. So yes, in my third attack, this gun was totally put out of action.
And by this time, you had expended all your rockets on the bridge, I presume.
Yeah.
So you had only your front guns.
Absolutely. We were completely, and we didn't even jettison our pods or our, spare tanks.
Right.
Nothing. We just did it on the thing. Perhaps, though the instructions were very clear, we were short of equipment. And as you probably know, we were winning the war, and the Russians had decided to join the Americans, and they stopped.
Okay.
So there was no question of, throwing away stuff if you didn't want to. Right? Of course, we were careful, and we were ultra low level. And Wing Commander De Costa had also taught us, I forgot to mention, towards the culmination of November month, we were doing all these high-speed attacks, shallow dive angle, high-speed attacks, and opening from the actual ranges of 2 kilometers, which are specified by Russians, which we never followed, right? But we learned. So, so that's very interesting. So we definitely, I definitely hit that tank. It was, that gun, heavy machine gun, it was silenced. And then as I pulled out I felt a judder on my aircraft, and the aircraft started turning left. And then I could see smoke on my aircraft, and my CO had turned right. Realizing that the aircraft was on fire and I'm going out of control, and I'm now at really low level, 100 meters and high speed after the attack, I ejected with my left hand.
Oh boy.
Because the stick was fully right, and I had full right rudder.
And you had still no control.
I had no control. And then I just about managed to keep the aircraft level and eject.
And the Sukhoi had what sort of ejection parameters?
It was 0-0.
It was 0-0. Okay.
0-0. Oh, it was one of the, I forget what the nomenclature of it is. I'm forgetting. But I should know it really. It's bad of me to forget. Because I ejected 3 times.
Yeah, right.
On the Sukhoi. And it saved my life all 3 times.
All 3 times.
Yeah, and low-level, awkward situations. This was in a turn to the left. The second was, in a frozen control rod failure, no hydraulics. And third one was no fuel. All fuel had drained out, and the engine flamed out. So, and then Harish Masand was with me on that ejection.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. Anyway, so so on after this attack, this aircraft started turning on its own to the left. And then I had to eject. So I ejected and I dropped, or I hit the ground almost simultaneously as I thought I had pulled the handle. Because I had blacked out.
Right.
I blacked out, and when I came to and my eyes popped out, there was this tree little above my eye level, and immediately I hit the ground.
Boy.
So the chute had just about enough time to open.
Just opened.
As a result of which I had a fracture, which was discovered much later. My ankle was blue and my neck was hurting, and I was crawling to get out of that heavy elephant grass. It was the initial thing was one of, I would say, what should I say? Not panic. I knew I had ejected. It was uncertainty. Yeah, that's the word. I was so uncertain of what to do next that things.
But you were sure that you were in enemy territory, right?
No, I wasn't sure. I was in tall grass, but I didn't know where I was. So immediately what I did was I pulled the parachute. I rolled it up and hid it. Then I pulled out I detached the, what you call, survival pack. We hadn't eaten, for days.
Right.
We was on real minuscule diets. All the people, civilians from Halwara had ran away. The wives were cooking and they were hounded into one house. Officers' mess was away from the base.
Right.
All this had to be factored in. We were all locked into the base ops. Nobody was going out or coming in.
Wow.
So it was, a situation that very difficult to explain. I didn't know where my wife was. So
and you had some Pakistani currency, some weapon.
Yeah. So I'm just coming to that. So I pulled the parachute, buried that kind of thing, parachute, pulled out this survival pack. I ate them. It gave me some sort of energy. Then the rest of it that I didn't need, I buried it. I had a pistol. I buried that. Currency I kept with me. The Pakistani currency was on my. And then I started crawling. And
do you remember the village or whatever that you came down next? What is the name
there was no village. I was in the thick. Yeah, that's what I'm coming to.
But looking back now,
around me, there was intense fire going on.
Really?
Intense.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it was intense. And not only that, Wing Commander De Costa went back and sent another 5 or 6 2-aircraft formations.
Wow.
Which kept attacking all those things that were standing there, plus over my head on targets that were beyond me. And I didn't know that I'm in no man's land.
Right.
So I had to, duck under those attacks as well. Anybody undershooting would have written me off. Oh my God. What an uncertainty that was. But so I was in that thicket for 3 hours, guns. 7:15, I hit the ground. I was captured only at 10:15. So for 3 hours, I was crawling around. Due east, when I crawled, I hit a barbed wire fence, 6 inches off the ground. Right?
Wow.
Now, I assumed it's a thing, and I was very correctly corrected by an army officer just recently. He said, don't say it's a minefield because you're not sure. But it was a warning system.
Right.
And he's right. So it was a warning system. It had some tins with stones in it. But I am very certain after that, from what I learned, that it was a minefield area. And to my right, I could hear the sound of tanks and maneuvers going on and guns firing, from the side in front of me. That is towards the west, because I started eventually then crawling west, because towards the sun was this barbed wire fence. And wherever I went, it was running 6 inches off the ground.
Oh, boy.
So then I decided to wait for nightfall. And that is when it took me 3 hours to decide what to do. And when I broke the elephant grass, I had contact with that LMG post, MMG post, which was firing. It had a sliding iron door. And those were the same 3 guys who came out looking for me ahead of my position, because the aircraft had crashed there. So I had a rough orientation, because the border is not a straight line. And I was in no man's land.
Yeah.
So I didn't know which side I had to go. But I certainly knew that if I crawled past this MMG post, I'm heading into Pakistan. And that's where I should go. And I had no civilian clothes or anything. I was in my overall. It was bitterly cold, right? And temperatures were zero in those areas. 0, 1.
December. Right?
Yeah, December. My God. Anyway, so I was bitterly cold and I was hurt, and I had to crawl, dragging my thing. But I think the rush of adrenaline and the blood pumping, heart beating, I was feeling quite okay. I had to tell myself I need to get hold of myself and wait. So I waited. And then I was lying flat in this tall grass with my face down, feeling this pain in the neck and my right ankle. That is when I felt a hand at the back of my neck, and that hand pulled me up. And when I looked up, I saw 2 soldiers in front of me and this hand at the back, and with cocked guns. That was my capture. The rest I'll tell you in the next episode. Yeah,
wonderful, sir. So this has been just truly an amazing start, but there's so much more to cover, and look forward to setting up time and speaking to you to pick up the threads on this from the time you were captured to the rest of your journey. But
sure, Guns.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really got tired.
Well, folks, that's all we have time for this week. Join us again next week. In the meantime, sign up for updates at blueskiespodcast.com. There you'll find links to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also write to us with your comments, questions, suggestions, and feedback from the website or to blueskies@prganapathy.com. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcasting platform such as Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. If you like what you heard, share it with your friends, give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app, and write us a review. It will help other people find us. I want to give my thanks to Saurav Chordia for our logo and Prithvik for the music. I want to reiterate that all the views expressed here are personal, and this podcast has not been approved by or reviewed by the Air Force, Ministry of Defense, or any branch of the government. In the meantime, stay safe and Jai Hind.